Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Coaching. My name is Kevin Britz and I'm an executive coach and international leadership facilitator and the host to the Lunchtime series happening every day at 12. Today we are chatting to a young fearless international leader in the iGaming industry with a focus on VIP operations. He has become a specialist in his field working across Europe and South Africa and currently runs the global brand facilitating two of VIPs at as the head of VIP 10Bet. Gali Hartuv. How are you doing, Gali?
Fantastic, Kevin. Thank you. How are you?
Fantastic. Cool. To kick it off, before we get to all the questions, when we first chatted, I didn't really, it's not something I focus on, but I didn't know that gaming was such a thing in the world, specifically online gaming.
Yeah, it's a massive industry. It's something that is very real and very present today. And yeah, it's definitely something interesting.
Yeah, I was looking at the website and the amount of options, and from live betting to live casinos to best or bet games, TV to sports. There's a whole bunch of like there's an entire world that I was not aware of.
Yeah, and it's evolving every day.
I'm sure. So, Gali, when we first chatted, one of the things that we chatted about when you saw more about the lunchtime coaching sessions, you sort of said that you have a really interesting point because you've worked across so many regions in your career so far. Today's focus, what we want to be looking at, is cultural consciousness, diversity, and inclusivity in strategy leadership. So I'm going to kick it off with us straight away with tell us who you are, what you do, and what we're going to be speaking about today.
Sure. So I'm Gali Hartuv. I was born and raised in Cape Town into a family of South African and Israeli parents. I currently work in Sofia, Bulgaria, as the head of VIP for 10Bet, which is an online sports and casino company. I've had the privilege to work abroad in two very different countries, namely Prague, the Czech Republic, and Sofia, Bulgaria. I've got 10 years or almost 10 years experience in high-level leadership roles, managing people and top-tiered clients. A little bit about me and my career. So as you mentioned, I specialize in the area of VIP, managing high-value clients. With a focus on maintaining a transparent and responsible approach to sustainable gaming experiences. Having said that, my entire working experience and training has been centered around customer experience, engagement, and understanding people management. Obviously, managing teams across the world, including over 35 different nationalities in the 3 countries where I've worked. I've been very fortunate to have that vast exposure to diverse cultures, and it's somewhat pushed me to evolve my leadership mindsets and strategies to be more culturally conscious and cater to diversity and inclusivity, which we will discuss today. I think it's also important that for the audience, they understand that this is an observational focus area. It's an insight that I'm sharing from my own perspective. And to the professionals who are listening today, hopefully they can find value and apply this to the day-to-day, because it will form part of the more broader conversational voice.
Fantastic. So in terms of what is cultural consciousness, diversity, and inclusivity in strategic leadership mean to you? Because I know that it's a personal point of view, but you've also spoken about some major successes that you've had in terms of this, and that's why having this conversation is a really good reference point for you. So, but tell us what does that mean for you?
So I think before actually getting into the main topic, which is the question you've just asked, we need to first of all acknowledge the current global climate that we're in, COVID-19, and shifting into this phase of next normal. So COVID-19 may have physically separated us through teams having to collaborate remotely. However, the main issues, which we'll get to shortly, they haven't just evaporated because we aren't physically together. If anything, the issues are being redefined through this COVID lens, and it's reawakening the discussion that needs to be had while we review this process. So the topic brings up various sensitive touch points, but it needs to be approached with this mature and open mind. So as a South African, as we know, our country has hundreds of years of history that centers around issues of cultural inclusion and diversity. It's a topic that means a lot to me, and it's very close to home. So given the importance of the topic, I think what we need to do is break apart the question into its various components, and let's address each focus area individually so that those listening get a holistic picture and understanding of today's conversation. So let's start let's start with cultural consciousness. So cultural consciousness to me is firstly defined as an awareness of culture in yourself, as well as culture in those around you, which results secondly in expanding your understanding for other cultures and trying to develop a deeper knowledge to other individuals' cultural backgrounds that influence, or affords you the ability to recognize new and familiar cultures. And then once you have that familiarity, engage with them. So as a leader, this mentality allows you to include these various practices, which we'll discuss a little later, and create an environment of belonging within your teams. It also leads us to focus on the term of cultural consciousness, which is cultural literacy. So leaders should introduce and educate their staff to be culturally literate. And what that does, or how we do this, is something that we also need to look at. So as a team, we need to collaborate with each other's traditional holidays, food, rituals. We need to encourage the practices in the workplace to raise awareness, as well at the same time appreciate that diversity in others' cultures while exchanging our own practices with each other. So it's a constant cultural exchange, so to speak. And the outcome really of cultural literacy is cultural awareness, and it instills a sense of unity, which drives productivity and morale because people are included. A deeper way, you could say, to implement a unified approach of cultural consciousness is to open the conversation. So you'll find that productivity in your teams, yet again, will increase as your staff feel appreciated and understood. The next point you touched on was diversity and inclusivity.
Before we go there, I just want to make a sort of raise a point there. I think, you know, the way that you language that in cultural literacy, I think a lot of companies, a lot of leaders in the world are not, they themselves are not literate about diverse cultures, and they don't pay attention to it. They don't make the time for it. Although, you know, diversity is a wonderful thing that's thrown out into business and wanting us to implement it, I think a lot of people don't actually take the time to pay attention to the differences of cultures in their own environment. So I must applaud the fact that you use it as literacy, because essentially you might be illiterate in certain areas, and how certain people function and why they do what they do, and, you know, essentially find the love and the joy that each culture has for why they do what they do.
Absolutely. And I mean, you hit the nail on the head. People are not taking the time to go and understand cultures that differ to their own, because to them, it doesn't involve them. And that's the problem, because it should involve them, because we are all different and we have these amazing cultures that if people just took the time to listen and understand, then as they engage it, they will be a part of it. So
absolutely, yeah.
So it ties quite closely with the other 2 points that you mentioned, which was diversity and inclusivity. Now, those are 2 points that you cannot speak about independently, because inclusivity and diversity go hand in hand. So if you begin with the basics, the first question is, well, what is the difference between diversity and inclusivity, especially in the workplace? So to break it down as simply as possible, diversity is the what, and inclusion or inclusivity is the how. And when we look at diversity, diversity focuses on the makeup of your workforce. It's their demographics, such as gender, race, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, just to name a few. And inclusion is the measure of the system that enables diversity to thrive. So due to the gaps in knowledge, which you spoke about already, leaders misinterpret or confuse these concepts, and often the result is that the terminology of these terms are used interchangeably, but they are quite distinctly different. And often what happens is the focus in companies, it shifts without balancing. So organizations focus on increasing diversity without focusing necessarily on the foundation that enables diversity. So you can absolutely hire diversity. For example, take South Africa and the BBBEE system, which is there to motivate and support diversity. But if your company culture does not embrace different perspectives, you will not be able to retain or sustain diversity. So the inclusion requires that everyone's contribution be valued, and that individuals, regardless of the diverse group that they come from, has the opportunity to do firstly their best work and advance equally.
Absolutely. And, you know, the fact that you bring up the diversity in South Africa and inclusion, diversity and inclusion in South Africa, do you think that South Africa gets it right if you compare South Africa, kind of the way, the approach that they take compared to countries like the UK and Hungary and Bulgaria where you stay?
I think when you look at it from a South African perspective, we have the diversity aspect and the focus, you know, the intention is right, but we've put very little focus on the inclusivity side. So we are in the exact situation that many companies find themselves in, where we are promoting diversity and we are putting a lot of effort, energy, and resources into becoming diverse, but we don't have the foundation that supports its sustainability, and therefore the system, if it can't be sustained, will fail.
Yeah, and one of the things that I was researching on when we, you know, decided to talk about this, and one of the things that really come up for me from a South African perspective, because I am South African and I find myself in this environment day to day. One of the things that I think a lot of people don't know about diversity and inclusion is that it's race is part of that, but it's not the key element. And yet in South Africa, it's quite specifically sort of an underlying tone that race is the most important thing, that, you know, we try and push with this with trying to achieve this diversity and inclusion, and yet it's not.
Correct. It's just an aspect of the broader umbrella of diversity.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, you know, like if you look at treating people fairly, encouraging communication and collaboration, using cultural and emotional intelligence, and seeking continuous learning, just 4 of those aspects of, you kind of suddenly broadens your environment to go, oh wow, yeah, this is not about race. This is about race. It's about culture. It's about emotional intelligence. It's about collaboration. It's about communication, and how that actually is afforded within your environment, within your work environment.
Absolutely. I mean, you can throw gender into that equation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So why is it important for workplaces to focus on both diversity and inclusion? I know we've just briefly touched on that, but don't you just want to divulge a little bit more of those two? For
yeah,
those two?
Absolutely. I mean, the levels of inclusivity directly influence, for example, the recruitment and retention of your top talent. So if you look at an organizational structure, when potential candidates or existing staff are scouting a business or trying to determine the culture of the company that they are currently employed in, the first thing that they are looking for is that there are others who are like them in positions of leadership, that the application of the working culture and the values that they are perceiving from whatever different perspective they are looking at it from supports an authentic and respectful behavior of the company that they want to work for. So that's the first point, because it's all observational.
Yeah.
So, you know, and we see it in organizations that are trying to be inclusive, when we're trying to imagine creative ways of measuring diversity. But we touched on it already with the South African perspective, putting the focus on diversity and not inclusion. But how do you measure inclusion? So, you know, inclusion is all about belonging. And leaders often move in the direction of engagement when they try to kind of suss out what inclusion is in their organization. So things like surveys, for instance, tend to ask numerous questions that measure where an employee feels they belong. You know, you get the typical question like, my ideas and suggestions count, or this organization values my contribution, or my manager treats me with dignity and respect. They're very general questions, and more often than not, what you find that there's a very present shortfall is that the surveys are not anonymous. And that angles your team's answers, because if you are trying to determine transparency, you're going to get the answers moving away from transparency, because people will have a fear of repercussion, especially when trying to speak freely. So, yeah, you know, this heightens where your team is. It also influences the company culture, because if a company believes that they are inclusive while trying to present themselves as transparent, people are going to feel unsafe to speak up. And with that being said, you know, we should probably look then at the pros. Well, what does diversity and inclusion goals for an organization look like? You know, that is a negative attempt to try and determine inclusivity, but, you know, every organization needs to first determine, well, what part of the journey are you on? Because it is a journey, which means that it's an ongoing process. So having these specific goals for diversity and inclusion, again, together, it's something that you have to regularly measure. You cannot just determine, well, today we are inclusive and tomorrow we should be inclusive because we are today. You know, you need to look at indicators such as, you know, does the leadership of the organization reflect the available talent pool in the marketplace? Are women or people of color or foreign nationals being afforded the same opportunities for advancement? Do our hiring focus areas reflect the skill talent in the marketplace for all available roles? Or is our organization actually committed to advancing diversity and inclusion, or are we just doing it for the publicity? So those are all the influential factors that govern this practice. And they will all fall under the umbrella, I suppose, of the next point, which is strategic leadership.
Yeah.
So
I just want to sort of point out one of the things that really stand out for me, and that is the indicators. I think a lot of the time people and you know and I make a gross assumption here and a gross generalization about how people handle this or what the approach is. And one of the things that stands out about the indicators is people are not often aware of the awareness of bias. And you know, the people hold such biases in how they do what they do, and what their upbringing is. One of the things that I had a conversation with Robert Pierce from the Neuro Institute of South Africa, and I think there's over 160 biases or 150 biases that people go through, or that we have as human beings. Not that there's anything wrong with the biases, but we do function from a lot of biases in our own environments. And if we do not have the literacy, as you mentioned earlier, in understanding what my biases are around a topic or a subject or someone else's culture, or why we're doing this inclusion, I will probably just function and come from my own bias and kind of go, well, this is how I do things and how I do life. So I think the indicators of knowing what that is and what that measurement is on the awareness of how a company should put that in place is really important. But I'm losing track here because I keep just wanting to talk. The next thing that you mentioned now is the strategic leadership, right?
Yeah.
So tell us more. How does everything we've just set up now lead us to the definition and the importance of strategic leadership?
Well, I mean, you touched on it briefly, and it goes a bit more in depth in the fact that strategic leadership is the ability to influence others to voluntarily make a decision that can enhance the prospects of an organization's long-term success when we are talking in the context of everything we've discussed. So, the world as we look at it now, we're interconnected through this digitization, which has collapsed most borders. It's been enabled by the expansion of technology, and the outcome of that is a result in this hyper-connected global workforce. And having said that, it's the time now where these international companies with global workforces need to empower an excellent employee experience. And it's so important because having a strong employee experience, led by, of course, a strategic leader, by extension will result in a better customer experience as part of the broader success strategy. So together, this is what's going to drive loyalty, customer retention, and then ultimately, by extension, a return on investment. So it's a key aspect of employing a strong employee experience, which will form part of your strategizing with a cultural sensitivity and respect with regards to your diverse teams that don't exist in a vacuum. So
sorry to interrupt you.
No worries.
You're saying that by doing this correctly, by taking the time to create those indicators, to really understand why diversity and inclusion is, this will literally affect your ROI and your customer experience?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because a happy workforce is a positive workforce. They are motivated, they are productive, and the customer will experience their positive experience within the company.
You see, and that's why I want you to, I brought attention to it, because I think, again, a lot of the time people are looked upon as, this is the management, these are my employees, and you have to do what I say. And, we're putting this document in place because we have to be inclusive in so many ways. But yet, when you take that out and you start paying attention to what the indicators are, you really start paying attention to who people are. And the moment
Correct.
people feel like they're being acknowledged, and Tony Robbins speaks about it very often, from a coaching perspective, when people are being acknowledged, it's the one thing that every single human on the planet has in common, is we all want some type of acknowledgement. So the moment you really do acknowledge and you do bring some inclusivity and diversity in that environment, suddenly you're also, I could understand why you would be saying that your customer experience would really improve to such a degree that it would obviously have a return on investment.
Absolutely. I mean, your staff are an extension of the company brand. So if you don't treat your staff correctly, then are you really treating your brand correctly? And
Exactly.
it's a whole ripple effect.
Yeah.
And I mean, it could be broken down further. When you look at the various levels in strategic management, and you mentioned it perfectly, it's what are we investing in this objective? It could be very easily broken down into different levels. So, for example, we've got 3 levels in leadership. You have your horizontal relationship between team members. If you look at Simon Sinek, and I'm sure you're familiar with Simon Sinek, his work on leadership, he is constantly drawing attention to leaders having to look after people in their care. And the reason for that is trying to avoid diverse staff members in the future or currently feeling like outcasts. And instead, what we want to do is we want to direct this horizontal relationship to encourage a safe and respectful environment that the team can work in and thrive in, instead of this vertical chain of command, which is I am the manager, you are my staff, and you do what I say because the paper says so. And that then takes you to the vertical relationship between team members and management. Leadership in its essence is about empowering team members in order to help individuals grow. And I think a lot of leaders forget that just because you are a leader, that the relationship building process just stops. It doesn't, it's continuous. So having this culture of respect within diverse teams will extend the engagement in the most humanistic way possible. And then touching on the final point, and how does this impact your customer success? Well, it's the final level of leadership. Your internal, external layer is between team members and customers. So when the team culture embodies a strategic leadership approach, it creates an in-house sensitivity when formulating new strategies. And that extends as an asset to driving business through your staff who feel empowered. So I think having maybe broken down the strategy levels of leadership, I think in that case, what differentiates a manager from a leader is the awareness and willingness to invest in safeguarding those relationships.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, in terms of managing teams in so many countries already, with a diverse grouping of people and cultures amongst your team members, how is this for you, and did you experience any challenges? So, and how did you overcome that? Because I can only imagine that, working with, running a global force, you tend to work with very, very diverse cultures, very, very diverse people. What are those challenges that you've experienced, and from how did you implement the relationship strategy, or the three relationship levels of the strategy you're talking about?
It's a great question. So, I mean, I've managed probably about 100 people across 3 countries. And approximately 35 or more nationalities. So the first barrier that I needed to overcome was the fact that the majority of my staff throughout my career have not been native English speakers. And as a foreigner in a leadership role, we cannot assume that just because our staff cannot communicate at the same native language level as ourselves, that they are any less intelligent or capable than we are. So an amazing quote, which I read a number of years ago, which has resonated with me throughout my career, is that you cannot judge someone for speaking English poorly because they know a second language.
Yeah.
And it's so true. And within my teams, one other thing that comes from this, besides the language, which you do need to acknowledge, and you need to be sensitive about it, because for starters, many of your staff will speak it as a second language, and you cannot judge them for making mistakes because they are trying. And as you continue the relationship, it improves.
Yeah.
But there are also inherent cultural and geographical differences that leadership on its own cannot eliminate. For example, if you look at cultural clashes or conflicts that are happening outside of the workplace, they have a way of entering the workplace. We've seen it happen constantly with conflicts around religion or nationality, gender, race, geopolitics. It's something leadership within the workplace is not going to get rid of because it's bigger than just the company.
Yeah.
So, since cultural and geographical affinities and questions around identity often go beyond skin deep, leaders also need to be mindful not to stereotype, especially not stereotyping members of their team. So, for example, religious affiliation or beliefs are not something visible. And we as leaders, in order to see the unseen, need to have a safe space to open this dialogue where comfortability levels may find to be compromised. We need to create that safe environment. So that, as a leader, will show mindfulness. It's going to also set the tone for that conversation. Now, additional challenges as well when engaging a new culture, especially a culture that you've never encountered before, is avoiding the external stereotypes that are influencing perhaps your hiring process or your perception based on what you've heard. And it's a very rookie leadership mistake to take stereotypes that you may not even believe in and apply them. So as leaders, we need to put our ego aside, because not everything is about you. Especially when it comes to your team. So sometimes, and what you will find, and I mean, let's talk about another thing in leadership, which is attrition. Attrition and people leaving your team may not necessarily be as a result of poor leadership or insensitive practices, but it's rather an area that can go beyond your influence. Take morality or external influences, for example. So some team members are going to be influenced, just like you could be influenced by community or cultural pressure. And even if you have a staff member that you've invested in, even someone who is a long-term serving member of your team, they may suddenly leave. I'll give you a good example close to home for me. As someone who works in the gambling industry, I've had staff that come from Islamic backgrounds who have left my team not because of my leadership, but because of their personal beliefs. And gambling goes against that belief. It's not something personal. We shouldn't take it personally, because we are not people who can judge people's external reasons for wanting to leave. We must bear in mind that attrition falls outside of the realm of belief. And sometimes it may also be just in the pursuit of personal ambition or career goals.
Yeah, so one of the things that stand out from what you're saying here is that safe space. When I speak to people, and I even do that in my relationship, when I chat to my fiance or give advice in terms of coaching, very often people need a safe space. And you preface that and say, okay, cool. If you preface that you need a safe space to speak to someone, that person realizes, oh, what we're about to talk about is really important, and I think maybe that's, a part of the approach. Maybe it's part of your strategy as a leader in the world, is to kind of go, for those who are listening, let's create a moment of safe space where in that moment, you're not allowed to react. You're not allowed to have a reaction to anything. You're only allowed to listen. So, and it's a really useful strategy when, in terms of being able to connect with people. And I think that's really probably part of the underlying message of today's conversation is, how do I really take the time to connect with another human being and understand them and allow them to be who they are in their fullness,
Absolutely.
So in terms of your strategy, what is your strategy for leadership and managing diverse people? Because as much as this is an overview of conversation, have you fine-tuned this quite specifically to how you do what you do?
Definitely. And I think it's really a case of trial and error, because no one's going to get it right the first time, and no one's going to perfect a strategy, because it's something that's evolving. So we've highlighted most of my touch points throughout this conversation, but to summarize it, really, it's you need to have an inclusive approach. You need to have an open mind. You need to be mature about the decision-making process wherever possible. I'll give you a really creative concept, and that's scheduling. People are always going to have preferences. People are going to have commitments, and people have a life outside of work, especially for people that are working on shift. Scheduling is also helpful when it comes to allocating what task is best suited for which person, and accommodating people's personal cultures, such as holidays, which form part of that safe environment. it's very good to also maintain expectations, both of managers and staff, because both of them can differ and they may go down different focus areas where expectations become unrealistic or unfair. And invest personal time in your team. Learn and understand who your team members are, what works best for them, and generally listen to your team, not just from a work standpoint. Go out, do team buildings, generally go and put yourself in a social environment, not just a professional environment, and associate. You don't need to be their best friend, but personal investment shows, firstly, that you legitimately care. You know, everyone always says, oh, well, time is money. No, time is not monetary, because you can't put a value on time, especially time that you voluntarily commit. So remove the conversation from the formal environment, like the workplace or the canteen, take it to the bar or go to a restaurant and speak with your staff freely, so that they can see you out of the professional light and see you off duty, just being a person wanting to talk. You know, like we mentioned at the very beginning, we're entering the phase of the next normal. We don't also have the luxury now of doing these team buildings and sitting down face to face. So we need to, as leaders, also think creatively and out of the box about, well, how do we overcome COVID and the physical divide within our teams? So, you know, the social budgets and the team budgets haven't gone anywhere. They're still there. We're just not using them because we can't physically use them. So, you know, think of creative ways of using that budget and invest in your team. So I'll give you an example in my team that's currently ongoing. We have a health challenge right now where we are sharing pictures of us exercising and the healthy meal choices we are making. And it's all in the motive of bonding and unifying and sharing something that we are doing together to empower ourselves to be healthier and better during a time that is negative. You know, another empowerment strategy in my team right now, seeing as we are all homebound, is that we are looking to sponsor courses, online courses for our staff, to help them be better at what they do in their current job, but also as something to take away from work that they can apply for the rest of their career. You know, Excel courses, account management courses, marketing courses, and it all comes from the same budget. It's just being allocated differently. So instead of getting drunk or having meals, do something that empowers people. And the result of that, quite frankly, has just been this unified enthusiasm, which has raised our energy levels, our productivity, our morale, our excitement, and it's friendly competition. So we share these ideas, and together, for me, at least wherever I try to apply this, we create a community in the workplace. And that is the focus area of the strategy. Is you need to create a community despite diversity, be inclusive, be respectful and mindful, and everything else will fall into place naturally, as it would in any community that would apply the same mindset.
Gali, I think you, everything you're sharing is you know, is spot on, and I think it's, you know, it's such wisdom, and being a young leader in the world today, and, you know, being able to adapt. I think, you know, part of what I hear, you know, as an underlying, I mentioned earlier a bit of acknowledgement, but also, you know, this is not rocket science. You know, being able to pay attention to people and who they are, and making the time for it. You know, I think, and that's the beauty about what we're talking about here. Yes, you know, when it comes to strategy and what's going to work best for your environment, that's important. But I do think that, you know, everything that we do and how we do is inevitably we still work with people, and that's why, you know, I do the Lunchtime series, because, you know, I want to be able to learn more, but I also want to be able to leave valuable tips and tricks for people, and that's really one of the, you know, two of the things is, you know, creating that safe space and acknowledgement. But if you could leave us with just a final question, sort of a final 3 tips of what people could actually start doing today, what would that be for them to really amp up their own leadership in their own environment?
I think investing in learning about the bilateral leaderships that fall within people outside of leadership roles and how they may display leadership qualities, which ties into being open with people who manage upwards. It ties in with the understanding that we mentioned that, you know, just because you're a manager, it doesn't make you a leader.
Yeah.
Don't hold yourself accountable at a personal level if people leave for fair reasons, because people are always going to leave, and it's not always bad or even due to your leadership style. And sometimes people leaving is actually good because it gives opportunity to others to enter your strategy and grow individually. You know, at the same time, we should also emphasize the fact, you know, leaders need to question their own perceptions. And again, like, you need active listening, you need feedback from your staff that is crucial to challenge and unpack the difficult questions, which may hinder your team or disrupt the organization's common goals. But ultimately, I think the final message is that leaders need to place themselves outside of their comfort zone, and they need to really form part of the diverse group that makes up their team, because they are a part of it. It's not a case of us and them. Leaders need to account for their own biases, which you mentioned earlier, and our lenses of perception, because cultural consciousness forms part of the umbrella of human consciousness, where each person needs to be introspective and self-aware to form a community that reflects this as a unified mindset, irrespective of our own biases, because it will create an environment that promotes respect, diversity, and inclusivity.
Fantastic. Gali, thank you for the time. Thank you for joining me on the Lunchtime series and the Lunchtime Coaching this morning. It's been such a pleasure chatting to you, and you've given me some insights and some learnings, and I absolutely love that. If anybody wants to find out more, if they want to shoot you a mail or get hold of you and just ask you your opinion or some advice, where do we go for that?
The best place to get hold of me would be through LinkedIn. It's probably my most active platform. So they can just search for my name. I'm assuming it will be in the title of the video. And they can just find me on LinkedIn, and they're welcome to message me anytime.
Fantastic. Okay, cool. So Gali, it's Gali Hartuv. Am I saying it correctly? Gali Hartuv?
Gali Hartuv.
Check him out on LinkedIn, guys. Gali, thank you so much for chatting, and this will go out on all the social medias, all the information that we've been speaking about today, and a link to Gali's LinkedIn will also be in the description box below. Gali, thank you for joining me, and thank you for the time.
Thank you so much. It's been great being here.